Welcome to Post 455, Conflict and Bargaining in International Relations, Study Session 1. Introduction. The basic theme of this study session is conceptualizing conflict. Conflict means different things to different people, including scholars and practitioners of conflict. Rather than take all definitions, we shall examine the most relevant of the definitions as it relates to national and international politics. Learning outcome. 1. Analyze the conditions of conflict. 2. Point out the conditions for conflict. 3. Outline the origin of conflict. And 4. Describe the two basic forms of conflict. Analysis of conflict. Conflict is a ubiquitous phenomenon, that is, it is present everywhere. Conflict is the means to change, the means by which our social value of welfare, security, justice, and opportunities for personal development can be achieved. In all walks of life, at different places, at different times, people are involved in conflict. The substance of international politics is conflict and its adjustment among groups of people who acknowledge no common supreme authority. The evident manifestation of the concept of conflict in various forms and dimensions makes it problematic to arrive at a universal conclusion. In addition, the apparent multidisciplinary occurrence of conflict in the behavioral sciences further heightens the problem of this definition. What precisely is conflict? The term conflict usually refers to a condition in which one identifiable group of human beings, whether tribal, ethnic, linguistic, cultural, religious, socio-economic, political, or other, is engaged in conscious opposition to one or more other identifiable human groups because these groups are pursuing what are or appear to be incompatible goals. Lewis Corser defines conflict as a struggle over values and claims to scarce status, power, and resources in which the aims of the opponents are to neutralize, injure, or eliminate their rivals. Conflict also refers to a state of disagreement between two or more parties over interests, ideals, or ideas. We define conflict as a disagreement through which the parties involved perceive a threat to their needs, interests, or concerns. Within this simple definition, there are several important understandings that emerge. Generally, we are aware there is some level of difference in the positions of two or more parties involved in a conflict. But a true disagreement versus the perceived disagreement may be quite different from one another. In fact, conflict tends to be accompanied by significant levels of misunderstanding that exaggerate the perceived disagreement considerably. Parties involved. There are often disparities in our sense of who is involved in the conflict. Sometimes people are surprised to learn they are a party to a conflict, while other times we are shocked to learn we are not included in the disagreement. On many occasions, people who are seen as part of the social system, for example, work teams, family, company, are influenced to participate in the dispute, whether they would personally define the situation in that way or not. Perceived threat. People respond to the perceived threat rather than the true threat facing them. Thus, while perception doesn't become reality per se, people's behaviors, feelings, and ongoing responses become modified by the evolving sense of the threat they confront, needs, interest, or concern. There is a tendency to narrowly define the problem as one substance, task, and near-term viability. Simply put, there are always procedural needs and psychological needs to be addressed within the conflict, in addition to the substantive needs that are generally presented. From the points presented above, we can establish that conflicts occur when people or other parties perceive that as a consequence of a disagreement, there is a threat to their needs, interests, or concerns. Conflict may be violent or non-violent, that is in terms of physical force, dominant or recessive, controllable or uncontrollable, and resolvable or insoluble under various sets of circumstances. On the other hand, conflict is distinct from tensions insofar as tensions usually imply latent hostility, fear, suspicion, the perceived divergence of interest, and perhaps the desire to dominate or gain advantage. However, tensions do not necessarily extend beyond attitudes and perceptions to encompass actual overt opposition and mutual efforts to prevent one another. It is important for students to note that tension often precede and always accompany the outbreak of conflict, but they are not the same as conflict. The causes of tension, however, are probably related to the causes of conflict. Moreover, if tensions become powerful enough, they themselves can become contributory or preliminary causes of the occurrence of conflict insofar as they affect the decision-making process. More important, there is no precise definition of conflict. However, in order for easy understanding of the concept, the table below will be very useful. Greg Walker developed this table in order to provide a sampling of various scholarly definitions of conflict. First, they indicate the inevitability of conflict in human affairs. Second, they reveal key features of conflict situations. To be sure, many of the definitions, for example, stress that conflicts involve interdependent parties who perceive some kind of incompatibility between them. Conditions of conflict. There are three main conditions of conflict. A conflict arises on the basis of competing claims or different perspectives over a particular issue or issues. 1. The parties concerned who are in competition or involved in a dispute must be determined or willing to ensure the dominance of individual position or perspective on the particular issue. 2. The contending issues or forces must be resolved to ensure victory for its own position. It is when we have these three conditions that conflicts are bound to occur. Origin of conflict. Lewis Corser, in his book The Functions of Social Conflict, 1976, identified or traced the origin of conflict to early man. According to him, there has always been conflict since the creation of man. Due to the limitation imposed by nature itself and the scarcity of resources, it has not been possible to prevent conflict. Man has since continued to struggle with man for the control of the environment and for the realization of his goals and the goals of his society. Forms of conflict. Conflict has three phases or forms. 1. Intrapersonal conflict. 2. Interpersonal conflict. 3. Suprapersonal conflict. Intrapersonal conflict. This is the conflict that takes place within a particular human being. Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart is a good literature that portrays this particular phenomenon. Interpersonal conflict. This is the conflict between individuals or between groups. Suprapersonal conflict. This type of conflict could be at three levels: societal, intrastate, and interstate level. Societal conflict is conflict within community. For example, Ife, Modakeke conflict in Osun State, and Aguleri, Umuleri in Anambra State in Nigeria. Intrastate conflict is conflict within a state. For example, conflict between NUPENG and Federal Government of Nigeria, ASU and Federal Government of Nigeria, while interstate conflict is known as international conflict. For example, Israel and Palestine, Nigeria and Cameroon. Summary of study session. In this study session, you have learned that conflict means different things to different people. However, Conflict is a ubiquitous phenomenon, that is, it is present everywhere. Conflict is simply defined as a state of disagreement between two or more parties over interests, ideals, or ideas. Conflict may either be violent or non-violent. The origin of conflict can be traced to early man. There are also conditions for conflict to exist. There are three forms of conflict: intrapersonal, interpersonal, and suprapersonal. We have come to the end of study session 1. Thank you.